The snow was going to kill her before her stepfather ever could. Wren stumbled through the darkness, her thin cloak soaked through and her fingers numb inside her worn gloves. The blizzard had come out of nowhere, sweeping down from the mountains with a fury that turned the world into a wall of white. She could not see more than a few feet ahead. She could not feel her toes. Every breath she took burned her lungs with cold, so sharp it felt like swallowing glass. She had been running for 3 days now, ever since she had overheard her stepfather's plan to sell her to a traveling merchant who dealt in unmated omegas. 20 gold pieces. That was what her life was worth to the man who had raised her since her mother's death. 20 gold pieces and a handshake, and she would have vanished into the underground trade that no one spoke of, but everyone knew existed. So she had run, stolen what food she could carry, wrapped herself in her mother's old cloak, and fled into the forest before dawn. She had no destination, no plan, no one waiting for her anywhere in the world. All she had was the desperate animal need to survive. But the blizzard did not care about her desperation. Wren's legs gave out without warning, sending her sprawling into a snowdrift that swallowed her up to her waist. She tried to push herself up and failed, her arms shaking too violently to support her weight. This was it, then. This was how she would die, alone and frozen, her body not found until spring thaw, if it was found at all. Then she saw the barn. It materialized out of the storm like a ghost, a dark shape huddled against the wind, old and weathered, its roof sagging under the weight of accumulated snow, but still standing, still shelter. Wren dragged herself toward it on hands and knees, too exhausted to walk, too stubborn to stop. The door hung crooked on its hinges, and she shouldered it open with what little strength she had left, tumbling inside onto a floor of frozen dirt and scattered hay. The relief of being out of the wind was so intense that she nearly wept. She lay there for a long moment, gasping, letting her body remember what it felt like not to be battered by ice and cold. The barn was dark, the only light coming from cracks in the walls where the boards had warped and split. It smelled of old hay and animal musk, faint but present, as if something had sheltered here recently. Wren forced herself to sit up, reaching into her pack for the flint and the single candle she had brought. Her hands were shaking so badly that it took her 5 tries to get a spark, and another 3 before the wick finally caught. The tiny flame flickered to life, casting dancing shadows across the barn's interior. That was when she saw the wolf. It lay in the far corner, half buried in a nest of hay, its massive body curled in on itself. Black fur, thick and sleek despite being matted with what looked like dried blood. It was enormous, larger than any wolf she had ever seen, larger than any wolf should be. Its eyes were closed, its breathing shallow and labored, and it did not stir at her entrance or the light of her candle. Injured, she realized. Possibly dying. She should leave. She should back out of that barn and take her chances with the storm, because sharing a space with a wounded predator was suicide. Wolves were dangerous at the best of times. A hurt one, cornered and desperate, would tear her apart without hesitation. But something held her in place. Something beyond logic or self-preservation. The wolf's fur rippled in the candlelight, and Wren caught a glint of something metallic around its neck. A chain. Fine silver links that looked far too delicate for such a massive beast, with a pendant that caught the light and threw it back in fragments of crimson and gold. She knew that crest. Every wolf in the kingdom knew that crest. The pendant bore the seal of the royal house, the mark of the Alpha King himself. Wren's candle slipped from her frozen fingers and guttered out, plunging the barn back into darkness. And in that darkness, she heard the wolf begin to stir. Wren pressed herself against the barn wall, her heart hammering so loud she was certain the wolf could hear it. She fumbled for her flint, her numb fingers clumsy and useless, while her eyes strained to see anything in the absolute blackness. The hay rustled. A low sound rumbled through the space. Not quite a growl, but something pained and raw that made her freeze mid-motion. Then silence. She waited, barely breathing, for the attack that never came. Seconds stretched into minutes. The wind howled outside, rattling the loose boards and driving snow through every crack, but inside the barn nothing moved. Slowly, carefully, Wren found her flint again and struck it against the steel. Sparks flew. The candle caught on the third try, and light bloomed once more across the frozen space. The wolf had lifted its head. Golden eyes stared at her from across the barn, bright and intelligent and filled with a pain that went beyond the physical. The beast was watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle, its gaze tracking every small movement she made. But it did not rise. It did not bare its teeth or flatten its ears in warning. It simply looked at her, as if trying to decide whether she was a threat or a salvation. "Easy," Wren whispered, the word coming out shaky and thin. "I am not going to hurt you." The wolf made a sound that might have been a scoff, if wolves could scoff. Its head dropped back onto its paws, those golden eyes still watching her, and Wren realized with a start that the beast was too weak to attack, even if it wanted to. The blood she had noticed before was worse than she had thought, a dark stain spreading across its side, the fur matted and wet. Something had torn into the wolf's flank, leaving wounds that still oozed sluggishly despite the cold. She should still leave. This was still dangerous. But the storm outside had grown even fiercer in the minutes she had been inside, and the rational part of her brain knew that stepping back into that blizzard meant certain death. At least in here she had a chance. At least in here, the wolf seemed more interested in dying quietly than in making a meal of her. "We are both in trouble, are we not?" she murmured, more to herself than to the beast. "You are hurt, and I am frozen, and neither of us is going anywhere tonight." The wolf's ear flicked toward her voice. Wren made a decision. It was probably foolish. It was definitely dangerous. But she had been surviving on instinct for 3 days now, and her instincts told her that this creature was not her enemy. She crawled toward her pack, moving slowly so as not to startle the wolf, and dug through its meager contents. A water skin, nearly empty, a hunk of stale bread, and buried at the bottom, the small kit of healing supplies she had stolen from her stepfather's house: bandages, a pot of salve, a needle and thread for stitching wounds. "I am going to help you," she said, holding up the kit so the wolf could see it. "If you let me. I know a little about treating injuries. My mother was a healer before she died." The wolf stared at her for a long moment. Then, impossibly, it shifted its body to expose the wounded side, an invitation, or at least a surrender. Wren approached on her knees, her candle clutched in one hand and her supplies in the other. Up close, the wolf was even more massive than she had realized. Its shoulder would have reached her chest if they were both standing, and its paws were the size of dinner plates. The royal pendant gleamed against its dark fur, and she tried not to think about what it meant that the Alpha King's personal symbol was hanging around the neck of a dying animal in an abandoned barn. The wounds were deep but clean, 3 parallel gashes that looked like claw marks from another wolf. A fight, then. Or an ambush. Wren worked in silence, cleaning the wounds as best she could with snow melted in her palms, then applying the salve with gentle fingers. The wolf tensed at her touch but did not pull away. Its breathing remained steady, those golden eyes never leaving her face. "There," she said when she had finished, sitting back on her heels. "It is not perfect, but it should help with the pain. The bleeding has mostly stopped." The wolf exhaled, a long breath that seemed to carry some of its tension with it. Then it did something that made Wren's heart stutter in her chest. It stretched its massive head forward and pressed its muzzle against her frozen hands, breathing warm air over her fingers. Once, twice, as if trying to return the kindness she had shown. Tears pricked at her eyes, sudden and unexpected. She could not remember the last time anyone had shown her gentleness. She could not remember the last time anyone had cared whether she was cold. "Thank you," she whispered. The wolf huffed softly and settled its head back down, but this time it was closer to her. Close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from its massive body. Close enough that when she finally curled up in the hay, exhausted beyond reason, the warmth kept the worst of the cold at bay. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, a runaway Omega and a wounded king slept side by side, neither knowing that fate had already begun to weave their threads together. Wren woke to warmth and the absence of fur. Her eyes flew open and she found herself pressed against something solid and hot, not the thick pelt of a wolf, but bare skin stretched over hard muscle. She scrambled backward with a gasp, her back hitting the barn wall, and stared at the man lying where the wolf had been. He was naked, or nearly so, with only a ragged pair of trousers clinging to his hips. His body was a landscape of power, broad shoulders, a chest sculpted with muscle, arms that looked capable of breaking bones without effort. Dark hair fell across his forehead, and his face, even slack with unconsciousness, was striking in a severe way. Sharp jaw, high cheekbones, a thin scar cutting through one dark eyebrow. The silver chain still hung around his neck, the royal pendant resting against his collarbone. A shifter. The wolf had been a shifter. The wounds she had treated the night before were still visible on his side, angry red lines against tan skin. But they looked better than they had, cleaner, already beginning to close. Shifters healed fast, she knew, faster than humans, faster than the weaker wolves who could not transform. This man would survive, which meant she needed to leave before he woke. Wren gathered her pack with trembling hands, her mind racing. She did not know who this man was or why he had been attacked. She did not know if he was dangerous, if he would hurt her, if he would drag her back to whatever fate she had been running from. The smart thing, the safe thing, was to slip out into the snow and disappear before he ever opened his eyes. She was halfway to the door when his voice stopped her. "Running again." Wren froze. She turned slowly to find those golden eyes open and fixed on her, the same eyes that had watched her from a wolf's face the night before. He had not moved from where he lay, but there was a sharpness to his gaze that told her he was more alert than he appeared. "How do you know I was running?" she asked carefully. "You have the look." He pushed himself up onto one elbow, wincing as the movement pulled at his wounds. The fear, the exhaustion, the way you keep glancing at the door like you expect someone to come through it. His voice was deep and rough, scraped raw by pain or disuse. "I have seen it before." Wren's fingers tightened on her pack. "You do not know anything about me." "I know you saved my life." He met her eyes without flinching. "I know you could have left me to die, or slit my throat while I slept, and you did neither. That tells me more than you think." She did not know how to respond to that. Kindness was not something she expected to be noticed, let alone acknowledged. In her experience, good deeds were overlooked at best and punished at worst. "The storm has passed," she said instead, gesturing toward the cracks in the walls where pale morning light now filtered through. "You should be able to travel soon, and I should go." "Go where?" The question landed like a stone in still water. Wren opened her mouth to answer and found she had nothing to say. Where was she going? She had no destination, no plan, no one waiting for her. She was a leaf blown by the wind, moving simply because stopping meant dying. "That is what I thought." The man sat up fully, grimacing but managing to stay upright. "You have nowhere to go, and I owe you a debt. Stay, at least until you have a better plan than freezing to death in the woods." "I do not need your charity." "It is not charity. It is repayment." His golden eyes held hers, and something in them softened almost imperceptibly. "I am not in the habit of owing people. It makes me uncomfortable. So you would be doing me a favor by accepting." Despite everything, the fear, the uncertainty, the voice in her head screaming at her to run. Wren felt her lips twitch toward a smile. That is a very manipulative way of offering help. Is it working? She should say no. She should walk out that door and never look back. But the truth was that she was exhausted, starving, and utterly alone. And this strange, wounded man was the first person in years who had looked at her like she mattered. "I do not even know your name," she said finally. He hesitated for just a heartbeat, so brief she almost missed it. "Alaric. My name is Alaric." It was not a lie exactly, but Wren had grown up in a household built on deception, and she knew the shape of a half-truth when she heard one. This man was hiding something. The pendant around his neck practically screamed that he was more than he appeared. But then again, so was she. "Wren," she offered in return, "and I suppose I can stay. For a little while." Alaric's severe face shifted into something that was almost a smile. "Good. Now, do you have any of that bread left? Healing takes energy, and I am starving." Wren surprised herself by laughing. It was a small sound, rusty from disuse, but real. She dropped her pack and settled back onto the hay, pulling out the last of her meager supplies. Outside, the sun rose over a world blanketed in white, and inside the barn, two strangers began the slow, careful work of learning to trust. 3 days passed before Alaric was strong enough to walk without leaning on the wall. Wren spent those days doing what she did best, surviving. She ventured out into the snow to gather wood for a fire, using skills her mother had taught her years ago. She melted snow for water and rationed their meager food supplies with the precision of someone who had known hunger too many times. And she tended to Alaric's wounds each morning and evening, her fingers growing steadier against his skin with each passing day. He watched her constantly, not in a threatening way, but with a quiet curiosity that made her skin prickle with awareness. He asked questions, small ones at first, easy to deflect. Where had she learned to build a fire so efficiently? How did she know which herbs in the salve would fight infection? Why did she flinch every time a board creaked in the wind? She answered some. She avoided others. And slowly, carefully, she began to ask questions of her own. "Those wounds," she said on the third evening, rewrapping the bandages around his torso. "They came from another shifter, a strong one." Alaric's jaw tightened. "Yes." "Someone you knew?" A long pause. The fire crackled between them, casting flickering shadows across his face. "Someone I trusted," he said finally. "A member of my traveling party. He turned on me during the storm. I barely escaped." Wren's hands stilled on the bandage. Why would he do that? Power. The word came out bitter and hard. It always comes down to power. He thought I had something he wanted, and he decided taking it by force was easier than earning it. She understood that more than she wanted to admit. Her stepfather had been the same way, a man who saw other people as obstacles or opportunities, never as human beings with their own wants and needs. He had married her mother for her small inheritance and tolerated Wren only as long as she was useful. The moment she became more valuable as a commodity than as a servant, he had tried to sell her without a second thought. "I am sorry," she said quietly. "Betrayal by someone you trust. There is nothing that cuts deeper." Alaric looked at her then, really looked, and something shifted in his golden eyes. "You speak from experience." It was not a question, but she answered anyway. "My stepfather. He raised me after my mother died. I thought—" She stopped, her throat tightening. "I thought he cared for me. I was wrong." "What did he do?" Wren focused on tying off the bandage, not meeting his eyes. "He tried to sell me, to a trader who deals in unmated omegas. I heard him negotiating the price." Her voice came out flat, detached. It was the only way she could speak of it without breaking. 20 gold pieces. That was my value to him, less than a good horse. Silence stretched between them. When she finally looked up, expecting pity or disgust, she found neither. Instead, Alaric's face was carved from stone, his eyes blazing with a fury that seemed too large for the cramped barn. "Give me his name," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "What?" "His name. The man who did this to you." Alaric's hands had curled into fists at his sides, the muscles in his arms rigid with tension. "When I am recovered, I will find him, and I will make him regret ever laying eyes on you." Wren stared at him, her heart doing something strange and fluttery in her chest. No one had ever offered to fight for her before. No one had ever looked at her abuse and responded with anger on her behalf rather than indifference. "You do not even know me," she whispered. "I know enough." He reached out and caught her hand, his calloused fingers wrapping around hers with surprising gentleness. "I know that you found a wounded stranger in a storm and chose compassion when you could have chosen self-preservation. I know that you have every reason to be hard and bitter, and yet you are neither. I know that whoever raised you failed you completely, and you survived anyway." His thumb brushed across her knuckles. "That is more than most people can claim." Tears burned at the backs of her eyes. She tried to blink them away, but one escaped, tracing a hot path down her cheek. Alaric reached up and caught it with his fingertip, his touch feather-light against her skin. "You deserve better than the life you have had, Wren," he said softly. "And I intend to help you find it, if you will let me." She should pull away. She should remind herself that this man was a stranger with secrets, that the pendant around his neck marked him as someone far above her station, that whatever this feeling was building between them could only end in heartbreak. Instead, she leaned into his touch and closed her eyes. "I do not know how to let people help me," she admitted. "Then I will teach you." His voice was rough with something she could not name. "We have time." The fire burned low, and the winter night pressed close around them. And somewhere deep in Wren's chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the flames began to bloom. On the 5th morning, Alaric shifted back into his wolf form to test his healing. Wren watched from the doorway of the barn as the massive black wolf stretched and moved through the snow, testing his muscles, checking for weakness. The wounds on his side had closed to thin pink lines, remarkable progress even for a shifter. He moved with a fluid grace that stole her breath, powerful and predatory, yet somehow beautiful in a way that made her chest ache. When he shifted back, she looked away quickly, heat flooding her cheeks. She had seen his body before, had touched it while tending his wounds, but somehow this felt different, more intimate, more dangerous. "I am nearly healed," Alaric said, pulling on the spare clothes she had found buried in the barn's forgotten corners. "Another day or two, and I will be strong enough to travel." The words should have brought relief. Instead, they landed in her stomach like a stone. Travel. He would leave, return to whatever life he had been living before the storm threw them together. And she would be alone again, facing a world that had never shown her anything but cruelty. The thought hurt more than she had expected, more than it should have after only 5 days. "Where will you go?" she asked, keeping her voice carefully neutral. Alaric was quiet for a moment, his golden eyes studying her face. "There are people looking for me, people who need to know I survived the attack." He paused. "I want you to come with me." Wren's heart stuttered. "What?" "Come with me." He crossed the space between them, stopping close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "You have no home to return to. I can offer you safety, protection, a place where no one will ever try to sell you or hurt you again." "You do not know what you are offering," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You do not know who I am. I am no one, Alaric. An Omega without a pack, without family, without anything to offer in return." "You are wrong." His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. "You are the woman who saved my life when you had every reason to save yourself instead. You are brave and kind and stronger than you know. And you are—" He stopped, his jaw tightening as if he were fighting against words he was not ready to say. "I am what?" Ren could barely breathe. The air between them had grown thick and charged, like the moment before a lightning strike. "You are my mate." The words hung between them, impossible and undeniable. Ren felt them resonate in her bones, in her blood, in a part of herself she had not known existed. The warmth she had been feeling in his presence, the way her body seemed to lean toward him without her permission, the strange sense of rightness whenever he touched her, it all suddenly made sense. "The bond," she breathed. "I felt it, but I did not understand. I knew the moment I woke and saw your face." Alaric's voice was rough with emotion. "My wolf recognized you before I did. That is why I asked you to stay. That is why I could not bear the thought of you walking out that door and disappearing into the snow." His forehead dropped to rest against hers. "I am not good at this, Ren. I have spent my whole life keeping people at a distance. But with you, I do not want distance. I want—" She kissed him before he could finish. It was clumsy and desperate, born from years of loneliness finally finding an answer. She rose onto her toes and pressed her lips to his, her hands fisting in the fabric of his shirt. For one terrifying heartbeat, he went still. Then his arms wrapped around her and he kissed her back with a hunger that stole every thought from her head. He tasted like wood smoke and winter, like something wild and untamed that had chosen to be gentle just for her. His hands slid into her hair, tilting her head back so he could deepen the kiss, and a sound escaped her throat that she had never made before, something between a gasp and a whimper. The mate bond flared to life between them, bright and golden and overwhelming, flooding her with emotions that were not entirely her own. His relief, his longing, his fierce, protective love. When they finally broke apart, both gasping for air, Alaric's eyes were blazing with a light that was almost wolf. "I should have told you sooner," he said, his voice ragged. "I should have—" "It does not matter." Ren pressed her hand against his chest, feeling his heart pound beneath her palm. "I felt it too. I just did not know what it was." He pulled her close again, tucking her head beneath his chin and holding her like she was something precious. "Come with me," he murmured against her hair. "Let me show you the life you deserve. Let me prove that you are worth more than 20 gold pieces or 1,000. Let me spend every day making up for all the years no one treated you the way you should have been treated." Ren closed her eyes and breathed him in. Pine and snow and something uniquely him. She thought of her mother, who had died believing that love was worth fighting for. She thought of her stepfather, who had taught her that trust was a weapon people used against you. And she thought of herself, standing at a crossroads with a choice that would change everything. "Yes," she whispered. "I will come with you." She did not know where they were going. She did not know what awaited her in Alaric's world. But for the first time in her life, she was not running away from something. She was running toward it. The castle rose from the snow-covered hills like something out of a fever dream. Ren had expected a village, perhaps, a manor house at most. What she had not expected were towering spires of black stone, walls that stretched higher than any building she had ever seen, and banners bearing the royal crest snapping in the winter wind, the same crest that hung around Alaric's neck. She stopped walking, her boots sinking into the snow as understanding crashed over her like a wave of ice water. "Alaric," she said slowly, "what is this place?" He had stopped a few paces ahead, his back still turned to her. His shoulders were tense, his hands curled at his sides. When he finally turned to face her, his expression was carefully blank, the expression of a man bracing for impact. "This is the royal palace," he said. "My home." Wren's heart began to pound, a sick dread pooling in her stomach. Your home, the royal palace. She forced the words out through numb lips. That pendant you wear. I assumed it was a token of service, a gift from the king for, I am the king. The words hung between them, stark and undeniable. Wren took a step backward, then another, her breath coming in short, panicked bursts. The Alpha King. She had been sharing a barn with the Alpha King. She had tended his wounds, slept beside him for warmth, kissed him like she had any right to put her hands on royalty. You lied to me. Her voice came out hollow, scraped raw by betrayal. All those days, all those conversations, you let me believe you were just a traveler, a soldier, someone like me. I never said I was any of those things. Alaric took a step toward her, his golden eyes pleading. I told you my name. I told you the truth about the attack. You told me half-truths wrapped in shadows. Wren's hands were shaking now, and she pressed them against her thighs to still them. You knew who you were every moment we spent together, and you chose not to tell me. Because I wanted you to see me. His voice cracked on the words. Not the crown, not the title, not the monster that rumors have made me. Just me. He reached for her, and she flinched away. Pain flashed across his face, but he did not try again. Every person I have ever known has wanted something from the Alpha King. Power, favor, protection, advancement. But you, in that barn, you treated me like a man, like someone worth saving, not because of what I could give you, but simply because it was the right thing to do. And now? Wren gestured at the castle looming behind him. What happens now? You bring home an Omega you found in a barn and announce her as your mate. Do you have any idea what people will say? What they will think of me? I do not care what they think. You should. Tears burned at her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. I am no one, Alaric. I told you that from the beginning. I have no family, no status, no education. I cannot read or write. I do not know how to speak to nobles or navigate a court. I would be a laughingstock at best, and a liability at worst. Alaric's jaw tightened. You are my mate. That makes you my equal in the eyes of... In the eyes of who? Wren laughed bitterly. The same nobles who will whisper behind their fans about how the king lost his mind in a snowstorm? The same council that will spend every waking moment trying to convince you to reject me for someone more suitable. Before he could answer, the sound of approaching hooves cut through the air. A group of riders crested the hill, their horses kicking up sprays of snow as they thundered toward the castle gates. At their head rode a man with silver-streaked hair and a face like a hawk, sharp features, cold eyes, a mouth set in a thin line. Wren watched Alaric's expression transform. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by something hard and dangerous. His entire body went rigid, and when he spoke, his voice was barely recognizable. Lord Cassius. The hawk-faced man dismounted and swept into a low bow. Your Majesty, we have been searching for you for days. When you did not return from the hunt, we feared the worst. His eyes slid to Wren, and something ugly flickered in their depths. I see you found company during your absence. I was attacked, Alaric said flatly. During the storm, someone in my own hunting party tried to kill me. Lord Cassius's face arranged itself into an expression of shock that did not reach his eyes. How dreadful. Do you know who was responsible? Wren watched the exchange with growing unease. There was something wrong here. Something in the careful way Cassius held himself, in the too smooth quality of his concern. She looked at Alaric and saw the same suspicion burning in his golden gaze. He knew. He knew exactly who had ordered the attack. And that man was standing right in front of them wearing a mask of loyalty. Not yet, Alaric said, his voice deceptively calm. But I intend to find out. Lord Cassius smiled, thin and cold. I have no doubt you will, Your Majesty. Justice always finds its way. His gaze slid to Wren again, lingering in a way that made her skin crawl. In the meantime, perhaps we should get you inside. The court is anxious to see their king returned, and I am sure your companion would appreciate a warm meal. Alaric's hand found Wren's, gripping it tightly despite her earlier retreat. "This is Lady Wren," he said, his voice carrying the weight of a royal decree. "My mate, and she will be treated with all the respect that title deserves." The silence that followed was deafening. Lord Cassius's smile froze on his face, and behind him the other riders exchanged shocked glances. Wren felt the weight of their stares pressing down on her, and for a moment she could not breathe. Then Alaric tugged her forward, and together they walked toward the castle, toward a world she did not understand, surrounded by enemies she could not yet see. The court was everything Wren had feared and worse. For 3 days she endured the stares and whispers that followed her through the castle's endless corridors. Servants looked through her as if she were invisible. Nobles regarded her with barely concealed disgust, their lips curling when they thought she was not looking. She had been given fine clothes and a beautiful chamber, but she felt more like a prisoner than a guest. Alaric tried. She could see him trying, pulling her close at meals, introducing her to members of his council with a warning in his golden eyes that dared them to disrespect her. But he was also the king, with a kingdom to run and a traitor to find. He could not be with her every moment, and in those moments when she was alone, the castle's true nature revealed itself. On the third evening, Wren found herself wandering the empty halls, unable to sleep. The mate bond pulsed steadily in her chest, a comfort even when Alaric was occupied elsewhere. She followed the pull of it without thinking, letting it guide her through corridors she had not yet explored, until she heard voices coming from behind a half-open door. Alaric's voice. And Lord Cassius. She knew she should not eavesdrop. She knew it was wrong to lurk in shadows and listen to conversations not meant for her ears. But something in Cassius's tone made her freeze, her back pressed against the cold stone wall. "The council is growing restless, Your Majesty." Cassius's voice was smooth as silk. "3 days, and already they question your judgment. An Omega with no family, no connections, no breeding. Surely you can see how this looks." "I do not care how it looks." Alaric's voice was hard, but Wren heard something beneath it. Exhaustion. Strain. "She is my mate. The bond is undeniable." "Bonds can be broken." A pause, heavy with implication. "We both know that rejections, while painful, are not unheard of. A king must sometimes sacrifice personal happiness for the good of his kingdom." Wren's blood turned to ice in her veins. "Choose your next words very carefully, Cassius." Alaric's voice had dropped to something dangerous, almost a growl. "Because it sounds like you are suggesting I reject my mate." "I am suggesting nothing, Your Majesty. I am merely presenting the council's concerns. The girl is a liability. She cannot read, cannot write, knows nothing of politics or protocol. And there are rumors." Cassius paused delicately. "About her origins. A stepfather who tried to sell her to traitors. An Omega on the run. Some whisper she may be a spy sent to infiltrate your court." "That is absurd." "Is it? You met her during an assassination attempt on your life. You were vulnerable, wounded, and she appeared out of nowhere with exactly the skills needed to save you. How convenient." Silence. Long, terrible silence. Wren waited for Alaric to defend her, to dismiss the accusations with the same fierce certainty he had shown in the barn, when he had promised to spend every day proving her worth. But the silence stretched on, and with each passing second, doubt crept deeper into her heart. "I will consider the council's concerns," Alaric said finally, and his voice sounded hollow, defeated. "But I will not be rushed into a decision." "Of course, Your Majesty. Take all the time you need." Wren did not wait to hear more. She fled through the corridors, tears blurring her vision, the mate bond screaming at her to turn back even as her mind replayed those terrible words. I will consider the council's concerns. Not a defense, not a refusal, just tired resignation, as if rejecting her was simply a matter of when, not if. She had been a fool, a desperate, lonely fool who had believed that a king could truly want someone like her. But fairy tales were for children, and Wren had stopped being a child the night she heard her stepfather negotiating her price. She reached her chambers and grabbed her old cloak, the one she had arrived in, still folded in the back of the wardrobe. Her hands shook as she pulled it on. The fine gowns, the soft bed, the warm meals, none of it was hers. None of it had ever been hers. She was just a stray that Alaric had picked up in a storm, and now that the storm had passed, it was time for her to disappear. The servants' entrance at the back of the castle was unguarded at night. Wren slipped through it like a ghost, her footsteps silent on the frozen ground. The cold bit into her skin immediately, a brutal reminder of the night she had first fled into the snow. But she had survived that night. She would survive this one too. She made it to the tree line before the howl split the darkness. It was not a wolf's hunting cry. It was something raw and anguished, a sound of pure loss that echoed off the mountains and pierced straight through her heart. The mate bond flared with sudden, desperate intensity, Alaric's emotions flooding through her like a tidal wave, panic, fear, and beneath it all, a love so fierce it stole her breath. She looked back at the castle, torn between the instinct to run and the bond that screamed at her to stay. And in the darkness of the trees, she did not see the figures closing in around her until it was too late. Rough hands grabbed her from behind, clamping over her mouth before she could scream. Wren thrashed and kicked, fighting with every ounce of strength she possessed. But there were too many of them. 3 men, maybe 4, their faces hidden beneath dark hoods. They bound her wrists with brutal efficiency and dragged her deeper into the forest, away from the castle, away from the howl that still echoed in the frozen air. They did not take her far. A clearing opened up between the trees, lit by a single torch that cast dancing shadows across the snow. And standing in the center, his hawk-like face illuminated by the flickering light, was Lord Cassius. "There she is." His voice was pleasant, almost friendly, and that made it worse. "The little Omega who has caused so much trouble. I must admit I did not expect you to make this so easy." Wren's captors shoved her forward, and she stumbled to her knees in the snow. She glared up at Cassius with all the hatred she could muster, refusing to show the terror that clawed at her chest. "You orchestrated this," she said through gritted teeth. "The assassination attempt, the whispers in court. You have been trying to get rid of Alaric since the beginning." Cassius raised an eyebrow, looking almost impressed. "Clever girl. Yes, I ordered the attack during the hunt. A shame it failed. My men were supposed to be more competent than that." He crouched down to her level, his cold eyes boring into hers. "But you complicated things, did you not? Saving his life, worming your way into his affections, a mate bond of all the ridiculous things. Do you have any idea how difficult you have made my plans?" "Good." Wren spat the word at him. "I hope I ruined everything." The slap came fast and hard, snapping her head to the side. Pain exploded across her cheek, and she tasted blood where her teeth had cut the inside of her mouth. But she did not cry out. She would not give him the satisfaction. "You understand nothing," Cassius hissed, all pretense of pleasantness gone. "I have spent 20 years positioning myself for the throne. 20 years of patience, of careful manipulation, of removing every obstacle in my path. Alaric's father trusted me completely, right up until the moment I arranged his hunting accident, and the son would have followed eventually, if not for you." Wren's blood ran cold. Alaric's father. The old king's death had been ruled an accident. Everyone knew the story. But it had been Cassius all along, hiding in plain sight, biding his time. "You will never get away with this," she said. "Alaric will find you. He will what? Avenge you?" Cassius laughed, a cold and hollow sound. "By the time he realizes you are missing, you will be dead and buried in a snowdrift. The tragic Omega who ran away in the night and froze to death in the forest. A sad story, but a believable one." He stood, brushing snow from his knees. "And once you are gone, Alaric will have no choice but to accept a proper match, someone I can control, someone who will make him easy to eliminate when the time is right." He nodded to his men. "Kill her. Make it look natural." One of the hooded figures drew a knife, its blade glinting in the torchlight. Wren closed her eyes and reached desperately for the mate bond, pouring everything she had into that golden thread. Her fear, her love, her location, all of it flooding through the connection in one final desperate plea. The wolf burst from the trees like a shadow made flesh. Alaric was enormous in his shifted form, even larger than she remembered, his black fur bristling with rage and his golden eyes blazing like twin suns. He hit the first guard before anyone could react, massive jaws closing around the man's shoulder and hurling him into a tree with a sickening crack. The second guard met the same fate, then the third, their screams cut short by the savage efficiency of the Alpha King's wolf. Cassius stumbled backward, his composure finally cracking. "How? The bond. That is impossible." Alaric shifted mid-stride, his wolf form melting into the body of a man, but his eyes remained feral and burning. He caught Cassius by the throat and lifted him off his feet with one hand, holding him suspended in the air like he weighed nothing at all. "You killed my father." Alaric's voice was barely human, a growl that resonated with the power of his wolf. "You tried to kill me, and now you dare to threaten my mate." Cassius clawed at the hand around his throat, his face purpling. She is nothing, a worthless Omega." "She is everything." Alaric's grip tightened, and Cassius's struggles grew weaker. "And you will never touch her again." Wren watched, her bound hands pressed against her chest as Alaric held her would-be murderer's life in his hands. She should feel horror at the violence, at the casual display of lethal strength. Instead, she felt only relief, and something deeper, something that resonated through the mate bond like a song. He had come for her. Through the darkness and the snow and the walls she had tried to put between them, he had come. Alaric looked at her then, his golden eyes softening despite the fury that still radiated from every line of his body. "Are you hurt?" Wren shook her head, not trusting her voice. He exhaled, and some of the tension left his shoulders. Then he turned back to Cassius, and his expression hardened once more. "You will face justice for your crimes, a public trial, a public confession, and a public execution. The kingdom will know what you are." He dropped Cassius into the snow, where the traitor lay gasping and broken. Then Alaric crossed to Wren and knelt before her, his hands gentle as he cut the ropes from her wrists. "I heard you," he said softly. "Through the bond. I heard everything." Tears spilled down Wren's cheeks, hot against her frozen skin. "I thought, when you said you would consider the council's concerns, I thought, I know." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "I was a fool. I should have told Cassius to go to hell the moment he opened his mouth. But I was tired and distracted, and I did not realize—" His voice cracked. "I did not realize you were listening. I did not realize I was losing you." "You did not lose me." Wren pressed her forehead against his. "I am right here." Alaric pulled her into his arms and held her like he would never let go. The great hall had never been so full. Every noble in the kingdom had been summoned to witness the trial of Lord Cassius. They packed the gallery in their finest clothes, whispering behind their fans, craning their necks for a better view of the traitor kneeling in chains before the throne. The evidence had been irrefutable, confessions extracted from Cassius's surviving men, documents found in his chambers detailing decades of treachery. By the time the verdict was read, not a single voice rose in his defense. Wren watched from a small alcove at the side of the hall, her heart pounding despite knowing the outcome was certain. She had chosen to stay hidden, unwilling to face the stares of the court while the trial proceeded. But Alaric had asked her to be here, and she could not refuse him, not after everything they had been through. Lord Cassius of House Varen. Alaric's voice rang through the hall, cold and final. You are found guilty of treason, regicide, and attempted murder. You will be executed at dawn. May the gods have mercy on your soul, for I have none to spare. Guards dragged Cassius away, his protests echoing off the stone walls until they faded into silence. The crowd erupted in murmurs, nobles turning to each other with wide eyes and breathless speculation. This was the scandal of a generation, and they would feast on it for years to come. But Alaric was not finished. There is another matter I must address, he said, and something in his tone made the hall fall silent once more. He rose from his throne and descended the steps, his golden eyes scanning the crowd until they found Wren in her alcove. Lady Wren, please come forward. Her legs felt like water as she stepped out of the shadows. Every eye in the hall turned to her, and she felt their judgment pressing down like a physical weight. The whispers started immediately. The Omega, the Stray, the Nobody who had somehow captured the king's attention. She forced herself to keep walking, one foot in front of the other, until she stood before Alaric at the base of the throne. He took her hand and turned to face the assembled nobles, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. Many of you have questioned my choice of mate, he said. You have whispered about her origins, her lack of education, her unsuitability for the crown. You have called her a liability, a distraction, a mistake. His jaw tightened. You were wrong. The hall was utterly silent now, every breath held in anticipation. This woman saved my life when she had nothing to gain from it. She treated my wounds with hands that were gentle, despite everything the world had done to make her hard. She looked at me, not the king, not the crown, but me, and she chose to stay. Alaric's voice softened, and he turned to face Wren directly. And when I failed her, when I let doubt and politics and the poison of lesser men come between us, she still came back to me. She is the bravest, kindest, most remarkable person I have ever known. Tears blurred Wren's vision, but she did not look away from his golden eyes. I was a fool to ever make you doubt your place here, he continued, his voice rough with emotion. I was a fool to let anyone speak against you without cutting out their tongue, and I will spend the rest of my life making certain you never doubt again. To the shock of every noble in the hall, the Alpha King dropped to one knee before her. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Kings did not kneel. Kings did not bow their heads to anyone, least of all a packless Omega with no name and no fortune. But Alaric knelt in front of them all, his pride laid bare, his heart in his eyes. Wren, he said, I love you. I have loved you since you pressed your hands against my wounds and told me to hold still. I have loved you since you laughed in that freezing barn like it was the first time you remembered how. I will love you until my last breath and beyond, if the gods allow it. He reached into his coat and withdrew a ring, a simple band of silver set with a stone the color of winter frost. Will you be my queen, my mate, my home? The word came without hesitation, without doubt, without any of the fear that had chased her through the snow and into his life. Yes. Alaric surged to his feet and kissed her, right there in front of the entire court. It was not a proper kiss, not a dignified kiss, not the kind of kiss a king should give before his assembled nobles. It was hungry and desperate and full of joy, and Wren kissed him back with everything she had. When they finally broke apart, the hall erupted, not in whispers or scandalized gasps, but in cheers, tentative at first, then growing louder as the crowd caught the wave of emotion rolling through the room. Whatever they had thought of her before, whatever reservations they had harbored, none of it mattered now. Their king had chosen, and he had chosen with his whole heart. Alaric pressed his forehead against hers, his breath warm on her lips. "I told you," he murmured, too soft for anyone else to hear. "You are worth more than gold, more than crowns, more than anything." Wren laughed through her tears, her fingers tangling in his hair. "You are going to make a terrible king, you know, all this kneeling and public emotion." His smile was brighter than she had ever seen it. "Then it is a good thing I have you to keep me in line." She kissed him again, and the cheers grew louder, and somewhere outside the castle walls, the winter wind finally began to soften into spring. 1 year later, the barn still stood at the edge of the forest. Wren had asked Alaric to leave it untouched, and he had done more than that. He had ordered it restored, the roof repaired, the walls reinforced, the old hay replaced with fresh. It was a strange request for a queen to make, and the servants had whispered about it for weeks. But Alaric understood. Some places held a magic that could not be explained, only honored. They stood together in the doorway now, watching the last light of the winter sun paint the snow in shades of gold and rose. Wren leaned against her husband's chest, his arms wrapped around her from behind, his chin resting on top of her head. She was wrapped in a cloak of finest wool, but the cold did not touch her. It never did anymore, not with his warmth always beside her. "Do you remember," Alaric murmured against her hair, "how you threatened to leave me to the wolves that first night?" Wren laughed, the sound bright and easy in a way it never would have been a year ago. "I did not threaten you. I considered it. There is a difference." A fine distinction. His arms tightened around her. "I am glad you chose to stay." "So am I." A year of marriage had changed them both. Alaric smiled more now, the hard edges of his face softening whenever he looked at her. The court had learned to respect their queen, won over by her quiet strength and her genuine kindness toward the servants and common folk. She had learned to read and write. Alaric had taught her himself, patient and proud, celebrating each small victory like it was a triumph. And somewhere along the way, the whispers had stopped. The stares had faded. She had become exactly what Alaric had always known she could be. She belonged here now, not because of the crown or the title, but because this was her home. He was her home. "I have something to tell you," Wren said softly, turning in his arms to face him. Alaric's brow furrowed with concern. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "Nothing is wrong." She took his hand and pressed it gently against her stomach, the same way she had dreamed of doing for weeks. "Everything is exactly right." She watched understanding dawn in his golden eyes, confusion giving way to shock, shock giving way to wonder, wonder giving way to a joy so profound it stole her breath. His hand trembled against her belly, and when he looked at her, there were tears on his cheeks. "A child," he whispered. "We are going to have a child." "We are." Wren's own eyes burned with happy tears. "The healers confirmed it this morning. A spring baby, they think. A new beginning." Alaric dropped to his knees in the snow, this king who had learned to kneel only for her, and pressed his forehead against her stomach. His shoulders shook with silent sobs, and Wren threaded her fingers through his dark hair, holding him close. "I never thought I would have this," he said, his voice muffled against her cloak. "A mate who loves me, a family of my own. I spent so many years alone, believing I did not deserve—" "You deserve everything." Wren tilted his face up to meet her eyes. "And I am going to spend the rest of my life proving it to you." He rose and kissed her, soft and reverent, as the sun sank below the horizon and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Behind them, the barn stood quiet and patient, a reminder of the night that had changed everything. The night a runaway Omega had stumbled out of a blizzard and found a wounded wolf who turned out to be a king. She had hidden in a barn during a snowstorm, not knowing what waited inside. And she had found her forever. In the distance, wolves began to howl, a chorus of celebration that echoed across the snow-covered hills. The sound wrapped around them like a blessing, like a promise, like the beginning of a story that would be told for generations. The Omega who became a queen, the king who learned to love, and the child who would carry their legacy forward into a future bright with hope. They lived, as true mates always do, happily ever after.